Thank you very much for coming. We have another session of the seminar this time, and since he's a new professor, but Bernardo knows her a lot, he will do the presentation this time.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Well, it's a pleasure to present my friend and colleague, Adriana Piazza. Adriana joined the operations group 2 months ago in the business school. She finished her PhD in 2007 at the University of Chile and Montpellier. She works in optimization of renewable resources in a very diverse way. I mean, she uses control theory, convex analysis, and usually Adriana's goals are to find where the trajectories go. I mean, you have a policy, you do things, you don't understand how your actions will leave the system in the end, right? I work with Adriana in a couple of papers related to this topic regarding uncertainty. So I entered on her research by including uncertainty on a related problem of her research. So today she's going to talk about deforestation and optimal management. Adriana?
Thank you, Bernardo, for the presentation. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks all for coming. I'm going to speak about deforestation and optimal management. This is a joint work with Shantanu Roy of the Department of Economics of SMU in Dallas. Some of the results I'm going to present are already published, and some are part of an ongoing work with him. And let's start. Generally, we observe deforestation in situations where either property rights are not enforced, which leads to illegal logging, or the management is based in a very short time horizon. We are going to present a model where we don't have any of these conditions. We have a model with property rights strongly enforced and with an infinite time horizon where deforestation might be optimal or not. And we are going to give conditions where deforestation is optimal and when it's not. There is a huge literature about conditions for optimal extinction of renewable natural resources, but this literature mainly deals with models where the growth of the resource depends on the remaining population. I mean, for example, fishes in the sea, where the population you are going to have next year depends on how many fishes you left in the sea, you live in the sea today. But with trees, this is different, completely different, because growth depends largely on the available land. You don't need many trees to have a lot of trees tomorrow. It is enough to have 1 or 2 that produce seeds and a very large empty land to have a lot of new trees next year. Plus, if you are allowed to plant trees, then you don't need any tree to have trees next year. And 0 is not in a steady state anymore. If you can deal with that, if you decide harvesting and planting, then 0 is just not an extinction state. So we are going to consider a managed forest plantation and an alternative use of the land. We have a fixed amount of land, and we have to decide what we are going to do. Either plant trees, either use it to something else that, well, you cannot do at the same time that planting trees. I mean, planting tomatoes, renting the land to a third party, building a shopping mall, whatever you want, something where there are no trees, right? And so this is our definition of deforestation is going to be when it is optimal to dedicate your land to the alternative use that is not forestry, right? And we are going to consider benefits from the timber that you harvest every year and you sell in the market, from the alternative use, I don't know, rents or selling tomatoes or whatever. In blue, I put some benefits that we are going to consider sometimes and sometimes not, and we are going to see what changes when we do that. One is the standing forest benefits. Like, these are mostly environmental, because forests protect biodiversity, they capture carbon from the air, whatever, right? A lot of environmental benefits that for a private owner are mostly externalities. The owner of the forest doesn't care about the carbon in the atmosphere or the biodiversity of the floods or whatever. But a social planner can be interested in that. So that's going to be like the difference between the two possible agents that are managing the forest, either a private owner or a social planner. There may or may not be subsidies offered to the private owner to force her to do something that is good for the whole society. And there are going to be costs of planting trees. So if you decide to plant trees, you have to pay something. And also cost of reforestation. This cost is different from this, because this is when you want to plant trees where you didn't have trees. And that depends on what your alternative use is. I mean, if you plant tomatoes and then you want to plant pines, it's something, but if you build a parking lot and then you want to plant trees, it's a different cost, right? So there's going to be, and again, this is in blue because sometimes we are going to consider these costs, sometimes we are not, and we want to see what changes with that. So our main theoretical results are, we found necessary and sufficient conditions for optimal deforestation. And when deforestation is not optimal, we find some lower bounds on the total forest cover. We use these theoretical results in some applications. For example, we identify situations when deforestation is privately optimal, but not socially optimal. So the private owner wants to cut all the trees and use her land for the alternative use, and the social planner doesn't want her to do that. We want to study whether these conditions for deforestation change with reforestation costs or not. Reforestation costs makes deforestation more or less likely. Same thing with the lower bounds when deforestation is not optimal. What happens with them? Do they change when I add a reforestation cost? So the outline for the rest of the talk is I'm going to speak a little bit about the related bibliography. This is going to be brief because there are not a lot of related works. Then I'm going to describe in detail the model. Then I'm going to spend quite a lot of time in that because it's a model I'm sure most of you are not familiar with. And then I'm going to talk about our results, the optimal deforestation, what happens when deforestation is not optimal, and a very brief toy numerical example to illustrate the concepts. I'm not going to do any proof, just to talk about and try to interpret the conditions we got. So about the related bibliography, 30 years ago, there are a couple of papers that were very important for this. Well, you know, the literature about optimal harvesting is huge, as Marco knows very well. But you can roughly classify this literature in two big classes. One where the model is very simple. You try to represent the state of the forest with only one state variable. So either you assume all the trees are the same, identical, so you only model one tree because all the rest are the same, and you decide that you're going to cut them all at once or to plant them all at once, and then you have only one state variable. Or either you have a state variable that represents the total biomass of the forest, and you have one equation describing the dynamic of the total forest.
When you say one kind of tree includes even the state of growth?
Yeah, you want one variable that gets all information. Could be the height, the age, the volume, whatever you want. Right?
You assume that all of them are the same state.
Yeah, this is one part of the literature. It's not what I'm going to present, but just to, to situate what we are doing. there is a the other big class of literature, of the works related with this. Well, they build a richer model of the forest with more variables, and they are forced to use some numerical tools to see what is going to happen, because just analytical tools becomes very difficult to apply. These papers of 85 and 86 are in between these two big classes. We are going to use a somehow richer model for the class with many state variables, and we are going to try to solve it analytically, solve the model analytically, and we are not going to be able to solve a lot, just to say some things about it, but we are not going to find explicitly the optimal harvesting policy. That's still open. So in this, Tappan, Mitra, and Henry Wan in 85 and 86 published a couple of papers where they proposed this new forestry model. It's a model that is multi-aged. They allow trees to have different ages. They only consider benefits from the timber that they harvest every year. The total area under forest is fixed, so they never talk about deforestation, because as soon as they cut a tree, they plant another one, right? So there is no deforestation in this model. So in this simpler model, the only thing they can do is to characterize the steady states, well, actually characterize the unique steady state and the optimal rotation period. So they know that there is one steady state. They also know that if you start close to the steady state, you are going to cycle around it with a known period. And they don't know what happens if you start somewhere else. The conjecture that is validated by all the numerical simulations is that you get somewhere nearer the steady state and you start cycling. Yeah, but this is not proved. It's open still. Well, soon after the publication of Mitra 1 papers, there is a new paper by Bowes and Crutila where they consider the same model, but they add standing forest benefits. So now we have the timber, the benefit from the timber and the benefit from the standing forest. They still, again, characterize the steady state and optimal forest rotation periods, and they cannot go any further because the model is very complicated. But they do some numerical simulations and compare the optimal solutions with and without the standing forest benefits. So they show examples where if you don't consider the environmental benefits, you cut the trees when they are this big, and if you do, then you cut the trees when they are bigger, right? Again, they don't have any alternative use, so there is no deforestation there. Later, in this century already, Salo and Tavonen include alternative use, but no standing forest. And now they have this alternative use. They could talk about deforestation, but they don't. I don't know why. They didn't think about that. They focus on characterizing the steady states when the steady state is either all the land is completely covered by trees or the land is divided. You have a mixed steady state, some alternative use, some trees. And again, they study optimal periodic rotations and the steady states and never talk about deforestation. So that's it about the bibliography, as far as I know. So about the model. As I said, we are going to classify trees according to the age. We're going to have age classes of trees. The hypothesis, the assumptions behind this is that two trees of the same age are completely identical to us. The only thing you need to know everything about a tree is the age of the tree. So that's a pretty heroic assumption, right? The second one is the number of the trees is proportional to the surface. This is, well, maybe not that difficult to accept. The idea behind this is we want to work with continuous variables and not with discrete variables. So if you count the trees, you have a discrete variables. If you measure the land, you have a continuous variable, right? With these two assumptions, you can conclude that the timber content in per unit of area depends only on the age of the trees that cover this area, right? Once you do this assumption, you can represent the state of the forest with this state vector. X1 of t is the amount of land cover of trees that are 1 year old at time t. X2 is the land covered by trees that are 2. So forth, well, up until capital N, where capital N is the age at which the tree dies or loses the economic benefit. Capital N can be as large as you want, but it has to be finite, right? And Y of t is the amount of land dedicated to alternative use. We assume that the total land is fixed, and we normalize the total land to 1, right? So we have a bunch of variables that, well, are all positive because they're all surface, and they're bounded with 1, right? Each year we have to decide what to harvest. Sorry, I will go back. What to harvest of each age class. You can harvest any fraction in a different fraction of each age class, or nothing, or wherever you want, right? So you have capital M decisions regarding harvesting. And then you decide how to allocate the land you liberated, right? So, and I mean the land that has just been harvested and the land dedicated to alternative use. You have all this and you have to decide. I plant here, I use the land for the alternative use here. So a very simple example where now the total land is not 1 but 10. And here we have 2 units of area of trees that are 1 year old, 1 of 2, 2 of 3, 1 of 4, and 4 units of area dedicated to alternative use. And we decide, in blue are the things we decide, or the manager decides. We decided to cut all the trees that are 40 years old because they're going to die anyway, so I rather harvest them than to lose them. We decided to harvest every tree that are 3 years old because we want to. We have the second of the trees that are 2 and half unit of area of the trees that are 1. Right after the harvest, this is what we have, 0, 0, 1, 1.5. These trees, next year, these trees are going to be here because they are 2 years old, now they are 3. These trees are going to be 2 years old. And I had, well, 4 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 had 7.5 units of area. I'm going to recall the benefits, right, and the costs. At period T, the Asian decides the harvest, and gets this benefit, only function of the total volume that was harvested, gets this from the alternative use, gets benefits from the standing stock if he is considering them, receives subsidies if there are, decides the allocation of the clear land, and pays for planting, and pays for reforestation if he is reforesting, right? So that's a lot of things that I'm going to keep going back to these benefit functions. Assumptions. We are going to consider concave, non-decreasing, and continuously differentiable functions, plus the standing stock benefits. We are going to assume that is a function of the total volume of standing timber. That's a simplification. This could be like a good modeling if we are interested in carbon sequestration. Right? The carbon you can keep in a forest, well, it's more or less proportional or a function of the volume of your standing trees. Right? Well, we have some results with the general standing stock benefits function, but they're more complicated. Plus, the cost of planted trees. So if I plant something at time t, the following period I'm going to have x1 t plus 1 trees, right? So the cost of planting tomorrow is going to be p times x1 t plus 1, right? Because I plant 1 unit of area now, next period I'm going to have 1 unit of trees that are 1 year old. So I don't need a new variable to model my cost of plantation.
Can you plant trees with a higher rate?
No, just, yeah, only 0, yes. Good question. That's actually one of the characteristics of this problem, because sometimes you can compare these models with actions model. If you sell and whatever in the market, in the financial market, but there you can buy and sell whatever you want. Here you can only sell trees and plant trees and plant seeds, right? So that's the difference. About the subsidies, we are going to assume also that they are linear in the standing timber volume. And these are the reforestation costs. Look, this is the positive part, right? If let me think, yeah. If the alternative use land decreases, this is going to be positive. It means that I'm planting, so I have to pay the reforestation costs. If not, then there's nothing to pay. I have this piecewise linear, non-differentiable, that's going to give a little bit of trouble, but nothing serious. So, this is going to be my problem. I'm going to maximize an objective function. For example, if I have a private owner that doesn't care about the environment, this is going to be her objective function. This is the benefit from the timber, this is the benefit from the alternative use, minus the cost of planting. If I consider the social planner, I have to add a term with environmental benefits. If I consider a private owner with subsidy, then I have to add a subsidy there. And all these can be with or without reforestation costs. So there's a lot. I promise I'm not going to describe all these possibilities because that could be boring even for me when I'm talking. But I want to focus on this. Here are the conditions for optimal deforestation and bounds on forest cover change with reforestation costs. This is what I want to talk about today. And just a brief, sorry.
So if you do the reforestation from period T to period T plus 1, so can I plant on period T plus 1, then I can plant trees?
Yes, yes. Yeah, there is no delay there. You decide to plant and you plant. Yeah, that could be also a modification. Yeah, assuming that there is some time, you need time to prepare the land. Yeah, that could be. Yeah. Well, the mathematical difficulty is that this is throughout all these works. Generally, the optimal solution in the forestry problem are not interior. Well, particularly now that we are dealing with deforestation, that's by definition non-interior, right? Because all the trees are going to have zero trees. But even when you're not dealing with deforestation, you normally have non-interior optimal solutions, so the necessary Euler conditions are not equations, but inequations, and that makes everything a little bit more complicated. Just to mention a little bit of briefly what kind of difficulties we face. So about the results. This result is published already, and it says that total deforestation is optimal for every initial state, no matter where they start, if these sets of conditions hold. So let me focus a little bit on here. What are we doing here? This is the marginal benefit of the alternative use. This is marginal benefits of timber. This is price of planting. And these are the marginal benefits of the environmental benefits. What are we doing here? We are assuming that we this is for the social planner, this is for the private owner. This actually, it's pretty bad, but this is in gray because they don't want to add another extra line for the private owner with or without subsidy. So in gray is with subsidy. If there is no subsidy, these are the conditions. For the private owner with subsidy, these are the conditions. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Discount factor. Discount factor, yes. You're right, never mentioned B. So, well, the deforestation state is a globally stable steady state if this set of conditions hold. All right? Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm going back. Oh, okay, here I just copy the same things. I want to connect some things with no subsidy. If this is not here, clearly there are situations where deforestation is privately but not socially optimal. There is some region of the value of the parameters where this is going to hold and this is not going to hold because this is positive, right? And if we have subsidy, deforestation is avoided if we have lambda this much. What? This is just to, well, I want lambda to be large enough so that this doesn't hold for some A, and no rocket science there, as Bernardo likes to say, right? Yeah. The problem here, okay, with this value of lambda, you avoid deforestation, but still you could have this match of trees, right? Deforestation for us is, well, positive trees, but could be only one tree or a very small one, right? Doesn't assure nothing. Observation, reforestation costs do not affect deforestation at all. If I add reforestation costs, deforestation is equally likely, right? It's kind of difficult to see at the beginning. One would think that reforestation costs make deforestation more likely. There is something I want to say. Defining deforestation as going to the zero trees state from anywhere, right? If I add reforestation costs, maybe if I start with no trees, I don't plant anything, right? So there the reforestation cost could makes a difference, right? Matters. That if I define like going from everywhere, right? Deforestation for me is going, no matter where I start, I go to the 0 tree state, then there the reforestation costs don't matter at all. Why? Because, well, didn't say that before, but actually when you have deforestation, you go to this 0 trees state monotonically. The area of the alternative use is growing all the time. It's never reused, so the reforestation costs don't matter. You never pay them, right? Very good. So what happens when deforestation is not optimal? One minus my lower bound. Deforestation is not optimal even if one of these upper bounds on the alternative use is less than 1. So I didn't mention this before, but our definition of deforestation is even compatible with having one tree, only one tree, sometimes. You don't even need to have trees every time with our definition, right? I could have one tree every capital N years, and this is not my 0 tree states, right? So, okay, it's not very satisfactory, I guess, right? So we have this. We can assure that at least once every A year, my alternative use is going to be less than y tilde of A, and I can assure that if deforestation is not optimal, one of these y tildes is going to be less than 1, so my forest cover is going to be positive, strictly positive. Once every A year, I repeat. There may be periods with 0 forest cover, even if the deforestation is not optimal, that's what I just said. And again, the bounds do not depend on reforestation costs. Well, that, of course, that...
There is some sort of monotonicity of the valle. I mean, if every 4 years you have some positive, that means that for 4 years you have this land. So there's some monotonicity of the valles.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, of course, if everyone... Yes, you can assure that at least once every 8 years, the forest cover is going to be larger than the maximum of all the 1 minus y tilde, j going from 1 to a. Yeah, you could say something like that. But this, yeah, we found this like independently. Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about that. Recall. Again, this is like the deforestation condition for the private forest owner with no subsidy, the simplest of all, only alternative use, timber harvesting and plantation costs. And this is a new result that says that y of t is non-decreasing if this holds for all A, where I added here the reforestation costs. This is true, right? So maybe deforestation, okay, if this holds, I have deforestation. I have here a weaker condition, right? If this weaker condition holds, I don't have deforestation, but I know that the alternative use land is going to increase or stay the same. It will not be reduced, right? So this, we call it like the monotonicity condition, right? Is it clear? This tells me that if I start with 33, I remain with 33. Doesn't matter if the other one, if this holds or not, right? But if I start somewhere else, well, I'm not going to go to the 0-tree state, but I'm not going to increase my forest cover either. Well, this is the condition for the private owner without subsidy, but all the conditions are analogous. Just to take the deforestation condition and add the Q here. That's all you have to do to get the monotonicity. So, if the reforestation cost is large enough, you can make the condition M to be satisfied, and you have irreversibility of deforestation. So it's so costly to plant trees, well, not to plant trees, but to take, you build a mall there, a shopping mall, and well, it's so costly to take this out that you actually cannot add land to your forest. Well, the alternative use land has a limit because it cannot oscillate. And what I said before, if we start with all the land dedicated to alternative use, with no trees at all, we stay there. So the total deforestation is a steady state. Not a globally stable, but a steady state. Putting everything I said together, if D holds, the deforestation condition holds, we have deforestation. If D doesn't hold, there is at least one upper bound on the alternative use that's less than 1. And I can assure that the total forest cover is going to be positive at least once every 8 years. But if D doesn't hold and M holds, then I can make this bound a lot stronger. Because now, what was behind this? I can only bound my forest cover once every 8 years because I have a lot of oscillations. But with monotonicity, I kill the oscillations. Cannot go, back and forth. But I kill the oscillations, but I don't change the lower bounds. So I have a much better situation, right? Right now, the total forest cover is going to be always larger than the largest of my previous bounds. So we have a situation where the cost of reforestation helps preservation of forests, which is kind of surprising because there are works where cost of reforestation help preservation, but normally it is when you have a lot of uncertainty with respect to the future. You don't know what is going to happen in the future, so you preserve. You are risk averse and you prefer to keep your trees because, well, it's always costly to plant again, to wait until the trees grow, etc. But here is a completely deterministic model, and we still get this, this result that the cost of reforestation help preservation instead of hurt.
So suppose I do deforestation at time t.
Mm-hmm.
So what would make reforestation attractive at time, let's say t+2, but not t+1? So why would I keep deforested for 8 periods, like you said, for 8 years, and then reforest again instead of just t+1?
Yeah, the reforestation or the deforestation?
Well, right? So if I deforest at time t, and then you say, maybe every 8 years I reforest again.
Yeah.
But why would I do that after 8 years instead of just 1 year?
I see.
That's what's forcing me to go to the state instead of just the t+1.
Well, it depends strongly on the state of the rest of your forest. Maybe you deforest at T, and then at T+1 you have a lot of trees and you don't need to plant again, right? Or better said, when you're going to cut or to plant, you have to think ahead, because you are planting now and you're going to need your trees like 8 years from now, 20 years from now, 30. So now you look at your forest plantation and you say, okay, should I plant today or not? And maybe not, because I still have a lot of old trees, and in 20 years I will have enough supply of timber, and I do not need to plant today. So I don't plant today, but tomorrow I make the same question, and maybe I do need to plant, right? Was it clear?
Deforest, they take all the trees.
Oh, you deforest completely. Ah, okay.
Deforest completely can take.
Yeah.
There are no trees left.
Okay, I hadn't understood. If you deforest completely, no, then you would probably plant. You have to plant a T+1 if you have to plant, because that's an autonomous system. If you're at 0 and you don't plant, next year you are at 0 again and you don't plant again, and you stay at the deforestation state. So then there is no delay there. If you deforest, if you're going to plant, you start at T+1. And if not, then you don't plant at all.
I think it was just good because of that. I think at least once every 8 years that you get below the boundary.
Yeah, but this is not total deforestation, right? Because when you have this equal to 1, this is, oh, I see. What you're saying here is at least 1, this bound is fixed. And you are saying that every 8 years you get below this bound. So you're not necessarily are at total deforestation and on the other years, right? You could be oscillating with very little trees, but not at 0, right? Because if D does not hold, you go to deforestation and stay there forever. You never plant any tree at all. If D holds, right, you go to deforestation and stay there. If D does not hold, I didn't say that before, but because, sorry, it wasn't necessary, but if D does not hold, then you never go to 0. Never. You never go to absolute 0. But you could be oscillating very near 0 trees.
Don't go to 0.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. So, very simple example. I'm going to assume to consider a 2-year-old forest with 2 biomass coefficients, 0.45 and 1. Discount factor, planted costs. I take benefit functions that are strictly concave for the timber, for the environmental utilities, and a linear function for the alternative use. It's not really important. In this example, if you check the conditions, you can see that deforestation is privately optimal, but not socially optimal. So if you do not consider the environmental positive utilities, you want to deforest. But if you do, you don't want to deforest. And we have to check the condition D. In addition, social planner that considers the environmental benefits wants to have or calculates a bound of 40% of forest cover minimum every year and 91% once every 2. Right? That's the lower bound she can calculate. Private owner's lower bound, 0, because he wants to deforest. So no, nothing. So these are the numbers you can get. If the social planner is going to offer a subsidy to the private owner to make him not to deforest, to avoid deforestation, right? So, if the only thing you want is no deforestation, and you are happy with having 1 tree like this once every 2 years, then you have to offer a subsidy that is 0.06 of the standing biomass. Right? And this is the same even if you have monotonicity, with monotonicity or without monotonicity. Well, because we said before, deforestation does not depend on reforestation costs. That doesn't change. But now imagine that, or you want something better. For example, you want to assure 40% of forest cover every year. If you do not have monotonicity, you need to offer this subsidy, nearly 0.8. But with monotonicity, that means that the reforestation costs are large, you have to offer almost 1/3 of the subsidy, because you are avoiding these big oscillations. Well, then if you want to ensure this 91% of forest cover, you have 1.54, so it's less than 1/2. And if you want to have all the trees always 100% of forest cover, with monotonicity you have to offer only this. And observe that this is even less than this one. That was the least subsidy you needed before. So, well, reversibility in this very, very simple model, it's good for preservation.
That 91%, 100% is every year.
Every year, yes. Yeah, both of them are every year. With monotonicity, you don't need to make this distinction, but here, yes, it's very relevant if you're speaking of every year or once every 2. But these calculations are for assuring this forest cover every year. Yes. So, this is all. In this work, we present proof that optimal deforestation may happen, may occur, even if we have property rights correctly enforced and the time horizon is infinite. Provide necessary and sufficient conditions to have optimal deforestation. Make suggestions about the design of a simple subsidy, linear on the total biomass, standing biomass, that avoid deforestation or assure minimal forest cover. Study how these reforestation costs affect deforestation. Well, they don't affect deforestation, but affect bounds on forest cover. Well, I don't know. They don't affect the bounds, but if the reforestation costs are large enough to assure monotonicity, then they do affect the bounds and the subsidies. And show some evidence that irreversibility helps preservation even in a deterministic setting. Some possible extension of this work. Well, deal with weak reversibility. I mean, with weak reversibility, I mean reforestation costs that are not large enough to assure monotonicity. You know, sometimes you have to pay something to reforest, but it's not that much, so you reforest anyway. So what happens there? How things change? And well, we always have this in mind, but that's much more difficult. What happens if I deforest, then the land I have here will have poorer quality in the future. So what happens with that? And add uncertainty a little bit in the line of my work with Bernard. And that's it. Thank you.